I'm Sarah Whitmore. I'm 67 years old, a retired landscape architect, and until last Saturday, I believed I had raised my daughter right. I believed kindness was enough. I believed that quiet sacrifice, the kind you don't put on display, would somehow be repaid, not with gratitude, but with decency. But last Saturday, my son-in-law proved me wrong. The wedding hall shimmered with chandeliers. White roses spilled down the aisle like a silk river. Everything looked picture-perfect, the kind of wedding you'd see in a bridal magazine. And in some ways, it was, except for one small, shattered corner: me. I stood near the buffet table, smoothing the hem of my navy blue dress. It was the same one I'd worn to my late husband's memorial. I hadn't planned it that way. I just didn't have another formal dress that still fit. People smiled as they walked by. Some even thanked me for how beautiful the venue turned out. They didn't know I'd paid for nearly everything: the venue deposit, the catering, the florist who imported those roses from Ecuador. Even the dress Chloe wore was picked from a boutique I had called and paid in advance. All done quietly, all done out of love. And yet, when I saw Matt approaching me with that glint in his eyes, I felt something cold in my bones. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say hello. He didn't even smile. He simply leaned in, close enough for the sour smell of champagne to hit me, and said, "You have the keys, right?" I blinked. "Keys?" "To the villa," he said. "We're heading there after the reception, for the honeymoon." I stared at him. "Matt, I told Chloe weeks ago. That place isn't ready. It hasn't been opened in months. There's no food, no staff. The generator needs servicing, and I don't recall agreeing to lend it for this." His voice dropped, sharp as glass. "Sarah, don't play games. Just give me the keys." I could feel the blood drain from my face. Around us, people were laughing, music was playing, glasses were clinking. But Matt's stare pinned me like a nail to a board. "No," I said, soft, certain. "I'm not handing over the keys." That's when it happened. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't shout. But his words sliced me cleaner than any slap. "In that case," he said, turning to the crowd, "this woman needs to leave." I stood there frozen. He clapped his hands. "Excuse me, everyone. My wife's mother has decided to make today about herself. She refuses to hand over the villa she promised us. So, unfortunately, we'll have to ask her to leave. Security?" For a second, no one moved. Then Chloe appeared at his side. Her face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't look at me, not once. "Mom," she said, "please don't make a scene." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My own daughter, the girl I carried, protected, loved beyond reason, stood beside her new husband as he publicly humiliated me. And not one person in that room, among 150 guests, came forward. So I did the only thing I could. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, dialed a number I hadn't used in 3 years. Then, quietly, I walked out. No screaming, no sobbing, no explanations. Just silence. 20 minutes later, as they were preparing for the first dance, the doors to the wedding hall opened again. A woman in a black suit stepped inside. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks across the marble floor. She walked straight up to Matt and Chloe, unfolded a single document from her folder, and said a sentence I'll never forget. "Per Ms. Whitmore's instruction, I'm here to address the ownership discrepancy of the property in question." The room went silent. Jaws dropped. Some wept. But I wasn't there to see it. I was already halfway down the road, wind blowing through my silver hair, knowing this time I didn't need to stay and explain. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is leave without apology. If you've ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, or hand over what you've earned, this story is for you. And if you're watching this now, maybe it's time to remember, you don't owe your silence to anyone. Stick around. The truth has only just begun. I didn't look back as I walked down the marble steps of the hall. The wind had picked up, lifting the edges of my dress and tossing my hair into my face, but I didn't fix it. I kept my head down and held my clutch tight against my chest. the leather imprint warming against my palm. My heels clicked against the stone, sharp and uneven. Every step echoed like a sentence. Behind me I could hear the murmurs, low, buzzing voices blooming like a hive. I caught pieces of it, as if the wind carried shards just to sting me. "Did you see that?" Her own daughter. She must have done something terrible. I thought she paid for the flowers. What kind of mother ruins her daughter's big day? What kind indeed? I reached the sidewalk. My car was parked a block away. I had given up the valet tag so Chloe's college friend could use it. She'd said her friend was nervous about parking downtown. I had smiled, nodded, and walked the extra block in heels, like I always did, giving up space, convenience, comfort. One small thing at a time, until I was a woman who quietly erased herself. As I walked, the shame burned more than the wind. My ears rang. I could still see Matt's smirk when he said "this woman," not even my name, and Chloe, my Chloe, looking through me as though I were a ghost from someone else's life. My hands shook as I unlocked the car. I sat in the driver's seat, but I didn't start the engine. Not yet. Instead, I stared at the dashboard and thought of the last 6 months. The venue hunt, the florist drama, the cake tasting. I had been there through all of it. I still remembered how Chloe had called me, nearly in tears, when the original planner quit a month before the wedding. "Mom, I can't do this alone," she'd said. And I had dropped everything. Again. I'd reviewed contracts, negotiated new rates, even convinced my old vendor friend from Portland to step in as a favor. She hadn't charged a dime. And that villa, that old stucco house by the cliffs. My husband and I bought it when Chloe was 10. She'd run barefoot through its halls, spilled orange juice on its cushions, read her college acceptance letter in its sunroom. She called it her forever escape. We hadn't gone there since Robert passed, but I kept it just the same. I'd paid the property taxes myself, fixed a leak in the roof, even bought lavender soap for the guest bath because Chloe loved the smell. 2 weeks ago, while folding napkins for the reception, she looked up at me and said, "Mom, I'm just glad you'll always have that house. No matter what happens, it's your place. You'll never have to worry." And I had smiled, heart full, believing her. And now I was the villain at her wedding, cast out like some unstable relative with poor manners. I finally started the car. My fingers were stiff, and I realized I'd been gripping the wheel tighter than I thought. The radio came on automatically, some instrumental piano piece, and I let it play. It softened the noise in my head, just a little. At the red light, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick had faded. My eyes looked hollow, older somehow. Or maybe I was finally seeing what had been there all along. The woman who gave everything, thinking love meant never asking anything back. I turned right toward the coast, toward the villa, not because I was going to hand over the keys, but because I needed to remind myself that I still existed. And as I drove, I couldn't stop wondering, when had my love become an inconvenience? When did my presence begin to ruin their photographs, their moments, their stories? Chloe used to cling to my waist when she had nightmares. When Robert fell ill, she braided my hair while I sat by his bedside. She'd make me tea when I forgot to eat. We had shared so many silent griefs and small joys. I had believed we would always carry that closeness. I thought she would grow up and understand the weight I had carried for us all. I never imagined she would see me as a burden to be removed on her wedding day. The turn onto the coastal road was quiet. No cars, no wind, just the sea stretching out on my left, indifferent and infinite. I rolled down the window. Salt filled my lungs, and something inside me loosened. I didn't cry, not then, but I allowed myself to feel the weight of the silence, the one I had carried for years, the unspoken gratitude I waited for, the apologies that never came, the boundaries I never drew. I reached the villa gates. The old iron creaked as I opened them. The driveway was scattered with pine needles and petals from last week's storm. I parked and stepped out. The house stood there, patient as ever, waiting. And in that moment, I remembered something else Chloe had once said when she was 17. "You always make things feel safe, Mom, even when everything's falling apart. I stood still for a long while, and then, slowly, I smiled. They could take the music, the speeches, the first dances, but this was mine. The first sign was so small, it almost slipped past me. We were sitting at Chloe's apartment on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Wedding catalogs spread out across the table, coffee going cold between us. She had always been the indecisive one, flip-flopping between ivory and pearl, fondant and buttercream, but that day her answers came quick, almost mechanical. "Round tables," she said, not even glancing up. "And no chicken. Matt says it's pedestrian." I raised my eyebrows. "Chloe, you love that lemon herb chicken from Grace's. You requested it at your graduation party." She hesitated for a split second, just long enough for me to notice. "Yeah, well, we've moved on from that. He wants short ribs." I sipped my coffee and nodded, but something in my chest tightened. I didn't say anything. Not yet. That week, I offered to help with the florist again. Chloe and I had always bonded over flowers. When she was little, we spent entire Saturdays pressing petals between pages of encyclopedias, making bookmarks out of baby's breath and clover. So I thought this part, this small, beautiful tradition, would be ours. But she sent me the final floral plan in a text. "Matt wants white roses only. No color, clean aesthetic," it read. I called her. "No peonies? No lilacs? You used to love those." She gave a light laugh, almost dismissive. "Matt says they're messy and overdone. He wants minimalism. And anyway, Mom, it's not the 80s. I chuckled softly, trying not to take it to heart. "So I'm 80s now?" "Not you, Mom. Just your taste." I didn't reply. I just stared at the phone in my hand for a long time. As the months passed, Matt's presence in every detail of the wedding became clearer. He didn't just offer opinions. He made decisions. Decisions that slowly but surely replaced Chloe's preferences with his. Even the guest list had been filtered. My college roommate Linda, who had known Chloe since she was in diapers, was somehow left out. "Matt says we're capping it at 150, tight circle only," Chloe had said. "But Linda sent you birthday gifts every year until college," I reminded her. Chloe sighed. "Matt just wants a fresh start, Mom. No one from the past who'll ask too many questions." Ask what questions? That line lingered in my mind far longer than it should have. It wasn't just the wedding. Chloe stopped visiting the villa, citing work or exhaustion. When she did come by, Matt always waited in the car. He never stepped inside, not even when I offered him his favorite iced tea. I asked her once, "Does Matt not like the house?" She hesitated. "It's just, he says it feels old, like a shrine. He prefers places that don't hold too many memories." "But memories are what make it a home," I said. Her eyes darted away. "Maybe that's the problem." That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the villa in the dark, trailing my fingers along the walls, touching the dents and scratches that held stories. The door frame still had the faint pencil marks from when we tracked Chloe's height. The bookshelf in the hallway leaned ever so slightly. Robert always said he'd fix it, but never did. I couldn't imagine seeing any of it as a problem. I wondered if Matt saw me the same way. Then came the email. It was a forwarded invitation Chloe had sent to a vendor. In the header, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Her name was listed as Chloe Bennett. Bennett was Matt's surname. They weren't even married yet. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, a placeholder. But when I gently brought it up the next time we met for coffee, she didn't flinch. "Oh yeah, I changed it. It just felt easier to get the paperwork out of the way early. Less hassle later." "No ceremony? No moment to mark it?" I asked. She shrugged. "It's just a name, Mom." I looked down at the foam heart swirling in my latte. "You had my name for 30 years. She shifted in her seat. "It's just logistics. It's not personal." But it felt personal. It felt like erasure. I went home that day and opened the old photo albums. There was Chloe at 5, dressed as a sunflower for the school play. Chloe at 11, clutching her science fair ribbon. Chloe at 17, beaming in her cap and gown. Every single page bore the name Chloe Whitmore. I sat on the floor with those albums around me, and I cried for the first time in months. Not because she changed her name, not even because Matt was taking so much space in her life, but because I had ignored the signs. I had pretended everything was fine. And somewhere in the pretending, I had lost my daughter without realizing it. From that day on, I started paying attention. Not to the colors of napkins or the fonts on the invitations, but to the spaces between her words, the pauses, the things she didn't say. And I knew, deep down, in that way only a mother knows, something wasn't right. Not with Chloe, not with us, and certainly not with Matt. It started casually, like most unsettling things do. We were having brunch on the patio one Sunday. The hydrangeas were in bloom, spilling over their stone beds like cotton clouds. Chloe had brought Matt along, and he'd spent the first 10 minutes circling the edge of the property like a surveyor rather than a guest. "This place has great bones," he said finally, settling into the chair across from me. "Must have cost a fortune." I smiled politely. It was Robert's favorite place. We bought it the year Chloe turned 10. She used to collect seashells on that beach. Matt nodded, his gaze never quite meeting mine. "Yeah, I can see that. Feels like a legacy kind of place." The comment was vague enough not to raise alarm, but later, when I went inside to slice the pie, I saw him standing by the French doors, phone angled discreetly at the view. Click, just one photo, but one too many. He'd never taken pictures here before. A week later, Chloe came alone. She dropped by unannounced, something she hadn't done in months, and sat on the edge of the old couch like she was trying not to crease her dress. "Matt's thinking maybe we could stay here more often," she said, not quite looking at me. "Just to keep you company. The city's loud, and honestly, this place is good for his migraines." I raised an eyebrow. "Matt has migraines?" "He's been getting them lately. Work's stressful." I folded the laundry on my lap slowly. "And how does moving in with me help?" She hesitated. "Well, it's not forever, just until things settle down. Maybe weekends." I nodded, but my chest tightened. "You both have an apartment downtown." "It's small, Mom, and Matt says it's not fair for you to be out here all alone." The words hung heavy between us. I was alone, but not helpless, not unaware. That night I poured myself a glass of Cabernet and opened the drawer in the study where I kept the deed. I hadn't looked at it in years, but something told me I needed to feel its weight again. As I held the crisp document, I remembered the day Robert and I signed it. How proud he'd been. How we said we'd pass it down to Chloe one day, when she was ready, when it meant something. Not when her fiancé sniffed out its square footage and saw potential for resale. That following weekend, Matt came alone. He showed up mid-afternoon unannounced, bearing a grocery bag of wine, cheese, and some imported olives I never buy. He complimented the woodwork, asked about the storm shutters, casually mentioned that the guest room would make a perfect reading nook. "Reading nook?" "You read?" I asked, half teasing. He grinned. "I dabble. Chloe says I'm more of a skimmer." He walked through the hallway with practiced familiarity, touching things as he went. A picture frame, the edge of the fireplace mantel, the brass key holder by the door. "You know," he said, "we could help you keep this place up. It's a lot for one person. Chloe worries." I stared at him for a moment. "Do you?" His smile flickered. "Of course." "Then maybe she should be here having this conversation." "She's busy. Bachelorette things, you know." He poured himself a generous glass of wine without asking and settled into Robert's old armchair like he belonged there. He started talking about property taxes, then insurance, then, casually, asked if I'd ever thought of refinancing. That was the moment it clicked. He wasn't trying to help me. He was inventorying. He was making himself at home because he planned to be. And then, as if to cement it, he said, "If you ever feel like letting someone else handle the logistics, I've got a great lawyer. Helped my parents transfer their lake house last year. Made it seamless." I stared at him hard. "My affairs are in order," I said. He raised his glass slightly. "Of course they are. I just meant, if it ever gets to be too much." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you, Matt. I'll keep that in mind." He left an hour later, but his presence lingered like the echo of something unsaid. That night, I sat by the window with a notepad and began writing down every instance, every word, every subtle maneuver I'd ignored before. Not because I planned to fight yet, but because I knew now, Matt wasn't just marrying Chloe, he was courting this house. And he wanted the keys, not just the physical ones, the metaphorical ones, the kind that unlock legacy and silence and old women who no one thinks are watching. But I was, and I always would be. I had rehearsed the conversation 100 times in my head, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the chipped mug Robert once called unbreakable. I thought I knew exactly how to start. Calm, direct, maternal. I would say, "Chloe, I need to talk to you about Matt." Just like that. No accusations, no trembling. But every time I tried, the words caught behind my ribs like fishhooks. The first opportunity came one Tuesday afternoon when she stopped by to pick up a necklace she'd left after a family brunch. I invited her in, offered coffee, even added that hazelnut creamer she liked. She sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up. "How's work?" I asked, stirring my tea though I wasn't drinking it. She shrugged. "Busy. Matt says I need to set boundaries, but he also gets mad when I turn off my phone." I smiled weakly. "That sounds complicated." "Matt's just protective," she said quickly, her tone defensive before I'd said anything else. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The moment passed like a gust of wind slamming a door shut. The next time I saw her was at the florist's. She had a clipboard and Matt was pacing beside her, arguing over lilies versus orchids. I hadn't been consulted about flowers, or seeding, or much of anything, really. I was the one who raised her, read bedtime stories, patched scraped knees. But these days, I was something ornamental, a vase on the mantel, a name on a check. Still, I tried again. "Chloe," I said gently, pulling her aside, "can we talk sometime soon? Just us?" Her eyes narrowed. "Why? What's wrong?" "I just have some thoughts about everything going on." "You mean the wedding?" "Yes, and Matt." Immediately her shoulders tensed. "If this is about the house, Mom, we're just trying to help. You're making it weird." I blinked. "I didn't say anything about the house." "Matt told me you've been acting distant. He said you seemed suspicious." I bit my lip. "Suspicious?" "He's trying so hard to make you feel included. You just keep shutting him out." I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "I'm not shutting anyone out. But Chloe, I've seen—" "Mom," she cut me off, eyes flashing. "You're the only person who hasn't made any sacrifices for this wedding." The words struck deeper than I'd anticipated. I stood there, momentarily stunned, watching her clip the pen back onto her clipboard like nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just gutted me in the middle of the flower shop. I'd paid for the catering, offered the villa as a honeymoon escape. I'd even sat through a menu tasting Matt controlled entirely, nodding politely while he spoke over both of us. And yet, in her eyes, I was selfish. Cold, absent. Later that evening, I pulled out the old photo album. Pictures of her as a toddler, finger painting on the deck. Robert lifting her onto his shoulders at the fair. Our kitchen covered in flour the day we tried to bake cookies from scratch and ended up with dough in our hair. That Chloe, the girl who held my hand until she was 12 and always kissed my cheek before bed, would have never questioned my love. But she was gone now, buried under layers of compromise and borrowed opinions. Still, I tried once more. A week before the wedding, she stopped by for her final dress fitting, and I asked her to stay for tea. She was wearing a pale blue blouse, her engagement ring catching the light as she toyed with a teaspoon. "Chloe," I said softly, "do you remember when you were 10 and we stayed up all night to make your science fair volcano?" She laughed a little. "Yeah, it exploded way too early. I cried. And I told you we'd clean it up together, that it was okay to start again." She nodded. "What's your point?" "My point is, we've always been a team, you and me. And now it feels like I'm on the outside of your life, knocking." Her smile faded. I continued, "Matt's a part of your life, and I accept that. But lately, I feel like I can't speak honestly without it becoming a war." She exhaled sharply. "Because you never support him, Mom. You always look for what's wrong." "I look for what's true," I replied. "And truth is, he's controlling you." "No, he's not," she snapped, standing. "He loves me. He makes decisions because I'm overwhelmed. That's what a partner does." "Does he ever ask you what you want?" She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her purse, eyes glassy with unspoken emotion. "I'm marrying him, Mom, whether you like it or not." She left without hugging me. That night, I sat in the dark, unsure if I'd done more harm than good. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused her. I'd tried to bridge the gap with memory and love. But some gaps aren't bridges, they're cliffs, and I was watching my daughter walk straight off the edge, holding someone else's hand, while I stood on the shore with nothing but silence in my arms. I pulled into the gravel driveway of the villa, the headlights casting long shadows over the rose bushes I'd pruned just a week before. The house stood quietly against the cliffside, its white walls tinted amber from the porch lantern I always left on. I stepped out and stood for a moment beneath the old olive tree, inhaling the sea-salted air. It was the only place I felt my husband's presence linger. Inside, the air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and lemonwood polish. I walked through the quiet halls, my heels silent now on the terracotta tiles. I passed the hallway mirror without looking into it this time. I didn't need to. The woman I had seen earlier, the one with hollow eyes, was still too close. I entered the study. The shelves still held our journals, the framed blueprints of the tech platform we had built from our garage back in the 90s, and a photo of us the day we rang the NASDAQ bell. Most people knew me as the co-founder of Halcyon Metrics. What they didn't know was I was also the architect behind its security architecture, the one that sealed our acquisition deal. When we sold the company, my name was quietly listed in the press release. He had wanted that, said I'd enjoy a life with less noise. At the time, I agreed. We cashed out at just under $40 million. It was enough to set up generational wealth. But I didn't. I took what I needed and gave the rest away in small grants, scholarships, women-led startups. I never told Chloe, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't want her to feel like she had to earn my love through gratitude. I just wanted to be her mother, not a walking asset. Matt never asked about my work, not once. He assumed I was a retired school teacher because I had once helped tutor Chloe in statistics. He made little comments. Jokes, really, about how women of my age should downsize, about how coastal property taxes eat into pensions. I would smile. I had the patience of a rock. But now, after today, I saw his words differently. I saw the way he praised the villa during brunch, the way he once asked if I had ever considered letting someone else manage it. I thought he was being polite. In hindsight, he was probing, and Chloe, sweet, distracted Chloe, was too wrapped up in guest lists and floral palettes to notice the undercurrent. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a notepad. The pen felt familiar in my hand. I didn't know what I was going to write, but I needed to put something down to prove I still had control over my story. I am not going to disappear quietly. That was the first sentence I wrote. It wasn't rage. It was a quiet promise. Then I reached for the drawer beneath the desk. Inside it, buried under a stack of birthday cards and receipts, was a red velvet pouch. I untied it and let the keys fall into my palm, the backup set to the villa. Heavy, warm, and still mine. I pressed them to my lips. Thank heavens I kept quiet all these years. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. There was no real reason, just a weight in my chest I couldn't shake off. Maybe it was the way Chloe's voice had trembled when she said she needed more time with Matt's family. Maybe it was the way Matt had been calling me Sarah instead of Mom, more and more often. His tone just a little too casual, a little too cold. Around 10, I changed into my robe and went to make some chamomile tea. The villa was quiet. Josephine had already turned in, and the only sound was the rhythmic hum of the ocean just beyond the terrace. I was stirring the honey into my tea when I heard the gravel crunch outside. At first I thought it might be a cat or some late-night walker, but when the footsteps came closer, slower, and I saw the silhouette pass the side window, I froze. It was Matt. He hadn't called, hadn't said he'd be dropping by. I stood motionless behind the kitchen island, my hand still on the spoon. A soft knock echoed at the back door. Not urgent, not friendly either. I opened it just a crack. "Matt?" He smiled, eyes flicking past me as though he were searching the room. "Hey, Sarah. I know it's late, but Chloe said she left her pearl earrings here. The ones for the ceremony." "They're not here," I said, holding the door. "She took all her jewelry to the hotel suite this morning." "Oh, really?" His face didn't change, but his eyes narrowed a little. "Mind if I double-check? You know how Chloe is. Might have left them on a side table or something." Before I could answer, he stepped in. I followed behind him as he walked through the living room like he owned it. His eyes swept across the furniture, the bookshelf, the credenza where I kept my grandfather's war medals. "She said they might be in her old bedroom?" he asked. "She didn't mention that to me," I replied, but I didn't stop him. Something in me wanted to see what he would do. He made a show of looking in drawers, then glanced at the hallway leading toward my study. That's when the alarm bells really rang. "There's nothing back there," I said, more firmly this time. He chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Didn't mean to spook you, just, you know how these things go. Last-minute panic. She'd kill me if I didn't at least look." "You've looked." He didn't move. For a brief moment, the room felt smaller. I stood my ground, every part of me alert. Just then, a door creaked upstairs. Matt's head jerked toward the sound. I didn't flinch. Josephine's voice drifted down from the landing, calm and steady. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" "Everything's fine, Josephine," I called back. "Matt was just leaving." There was a pause, then the soft sound of her retreating steps. Matt offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't mean to cause trouble." "You should go," I said, stepping toward the door. "It's late. Big day tomorrow." He held my gaze for a beat too long before nodding. "Of course. See you at the wedding." When he was gone, I locked the door behind him and stood there, the metal of the lock cool beneath my fingers. The next morning, Josephine placed my tea down beside me and said softly, "He went into your study. I saw him." I looked up. "You were awake?" I heard the car. I watched from the top of the stairs. He opened the drawer where you keep the safe remote. I felt my stomach tighten. "He didn't take anything?" "No," she said, "but he knew exactly where to look." I stared out the window, the waves crashing in the distance. He wasn't looking for earrings. He was looking for access. He wanted the room with the biometric safe, the one behind the bookcase, the one where I kept the property titles, the secondary deed, the original founding agreements from Halcyon Metrics, and the signed NDA from the buyout. All of it. Thank heavens for Josephine, for her quiet steps and steady eyes. I reached into my pocket and felt for the keys, the real ones, still there, still warm. That night, I made a quiet decision. Let the wedding happen. Let them smile. Let them play their game. I had built entire systems to outsmart people more cunning than Matt. He thought I was just an aging widow clinging to a cliffside villa and a fading memory. But I had one rule I never broke. I don't bluff. I build. And when I act quietly, but completely. When I stepped out of the ballroom, the night air hit me like a cleansing wave. The chatter of guests, the music, even the sting of Matt's words still echoed behind me. But out here, under the soft glow of the lanterns, I felt an unexpected calm. My heels clicked against the stone walkway as I headed toward the parking lot, every step steadier than the last. I could still hear Chloe's laughter inside, brittle and forced, as if nothing had happened. But I knew the crack in the facade had already split wide open. I paused beneath the old oak tree that shadowed the entrance, slipped my hand into my purse, and pulled out my phone. For a moment, I stared at the black screen, my reflection faint against the glass. I had hoped, prayed, that I would never have to press this particular number. But tonight, after everything, there was no more room for hesitation. I dialed. The line clicked once, twice, then connected. "Maggie," I said quietly, my voice firmer than I expected. "It's time." There was no gasp, no surprise, only a measured silence on the other end before she replied, "Where?" "The wedding. The Royal Crest Ballroom. 20 minutes." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Bring the villa files." Another pause, and then a low, deliberate answer. "Understood." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse, my breath visible in the night air. For a brief second, I closed my eyes and remembered the day Robert had introduced us. Maggie wasn't mine by blood. She was his daughter from a marriage long before me, a woman carved out of steel and logic. At first, we had circled one another cautiously, unsure how much space we were allowed to take in each other's lives. But over time, respect had rooted itself quietly between us. She had no illusions, no need for performance. She was a woman of action, and though her loyalty was rarely offered, once given it was unshakable. I had chosen her for this moment years ago, though I never admitted it out loud. When Robert passed and I began safeguarding the documents that tied my fortune to silence, Maggie had been the one I trusted to handle the contingencies. A lawyer with a reputation for precision and a demeanor that could freeze a room, she wasn't someone easily swayed by sentiment. That was exactly what I needed, someone who could separate tears from truth. The faint sound of laughter spilled from the ballroom as a door opened and shut. I stepped further into the shadows, clutching my shawl tighter around my shoulders. 20 minutes. I replayed the words like a mantra. In 20 minutes, the air inside would shift. In 20 minutes, the smug confidence in Matt's eyes would falter. In 20 minutes, Chloe would have to confront a version of me she had never met before, the version I had kept hidden for years. My phone buzzed once in my hand, a simple text from Maggie. "On my way." I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of certainty settle into me. For so long, I had chosen silence. I had lived modestly, blending into corners, letting others underestimate me. Tonight, that silence would end, not with shouting or revenge, but with the truth arriving in the hands of a woman no one in that ballroom expected to see. As I walked toward my car, I felt the heaviness in my chest give way to a steadier rhythm. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was resolve, the kind that comes when you finally stop pretending that dignity can survive on crumbs, the kind that comes when you realize you're done protecting people who treat you like an afterthought. I slid into the driver's seat, rested my palms on the steering wheel, and whispered to the empty air, 20 minutes. When Maggie arrived, she didn't walk, she strode. Her presence cut through the drifting music and candlelight like a blade. Dressed in a sleek navy suit, her hair pulled into its usual low chignon, she held a leather folio against her chest like a weapon. Her eyes scanned the crowd before settling on me, and with a subtle nod, we slipped away together down the side hallway toward a quiet lounge near the rear of the venue. She didn't speak until the doors shut behind us. "You were right to call," she said simply, setting the folio down on the table. "I brought everything, including the addendum you requested." I sat slowly, smoothing the hem of my dress, fingers trembling just slightly. "Is it all still enforceable?" Her brows arched. "It's airtight. You never transferred ownership. The villa is still legally yours. No loopholes, no conditional clauses. You can reclaim it this evening if you choose." I nodded, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying beginning to lift. Maggie opened the folio and slid a series of documents toward me. I recognized the deed, my name, in clear, unwavering print, still listed as sole owner. She tapped the signature line at the bottom. "You're protected," she said. "Matt has no legal standing. Not now, not ever." I reached for the page, letting my fingers rest on it. "And the file?" She hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a sealed envelope, thicker than I remembered. She handed it to me without a word. I peeled it open carefully and looked at the papers inside. My eyes scanned the lines slowly, the details falling into place like the final clicks of a lock turning. Bank statements, digital correspondence, photographs, dates. Each one painting a picture I had only suspected until now. I leaned back, the envelope still in my hand. So he was planning this all along. Maggie didn't answer. She didn't need to. He'd opened a joint account using Chloe's maiden name, ironically, the one she changed so quickly to match his. He had been siphoning funds quietly for months, funneling small amounts from Chloe's earnings and investments, likely convinced she wouldn't notice or would be too in love to care. He had also contacted a real estate broker in Miami 2 weeks ago, inquiring about properties and citing an expected inheritance by the fall. I closed the file slowly. He had been trying to manipulate me into handing over the villa, not for sentiment, not out of care for Chloe, but to liquidate it. He wanted to sell it, flip it, and disappear with the money before anyone could stop him. "Do you want to go public?" Maggie asked. "No," I said, shaking my head. "That would humiliate Chloe. I need to protect her from his plans without destroying her completely." She studied me for a long moment. "Then what's your next move?" "I take back what's mine," I said quietly, "and I let them figure out what trust really means." Maggie handed me the form I'd signed years ago, the one allowing immediate revocation of occupancy rights. I had put it in place after Robert died, just in case, a clause that allowed me to reclaim the villa at will, no notice required. "They won't know what's coming," she said. "That's the point," I replied. We sat in silence for a few moments. I could hear the faint swell of music returning as the ballroom doors opened and closed. My hands were steady now, the tremble gone. I had always known who I was beneath the modest cardigans and quiet smiles. I had just hoped I wouldn't have to remind anyone else. Maggie closed the folio and handed it to me. "You want me to come in with you?" I thought for a moment. "No, not yet. I want to walk in alone." She gave a faint smile. "Then call when you need the next step." "I will," I said, rising to my feet. We walked back through the corridor together until the edge of the ballroom came into view. I paused, gathering the folio close to my chest. Maggie gave a slight nod, then stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. I stood there a moment longer, the music louder now, the scent of champagne and roses drifting through the air. Chloe's laugh rang out from somewhere inside, and Matt's voice followed, smooth, self-assured. They had no idea. As I stepped forward, a quiet calm settled over me. I wasn't walking into a celebration anymore. I was walking into a reckoning, with truth in my hand and the law behind me. I had just returned to my table, the leather folio resting in my lap, when I saw her. Maggie, standing at the edge of the ballroom, alone and composed. She wasn't wearing anything extravagant, just the same navy suit she always wore in courtrooms. But somehow, she held more presence than anyone else in the room. She didn't make a scene. She didn't raise her voice or wave a hand. She simply walked across the polished floor with deliberate steps, weaving through candlelit tables, past guests who turned to glance curiously until she reached the man holding the microphone near the stage, the MC. He looked surprised when she approached. She leaned in, said something too low for anyone to hear, then handed him a thick cream envelope. His brows drew together, his fingers tightening around the paper. He hesitated, but Maggie gave a small nod, then stepped back and stood silently to the side, arms crossed, eyes trained forward. The music had faded by then. Conversation stuttered, then stopped altogether. The MC cleared his throat, holding the envelope like it burned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice suddenly unsure, "I've been handed a document, requested to be read aloud by legal counsel present at this event." People exchanged glances. Someone near the back chuckled nervously. He unfolded the paper slowly. "This is a formal notice under Oregon Revised Statutes (POR 105.105) regarding property rights and revocation of license to occupy." A ripple moved through the room as if a cold wind had passed over us. I didn't blink. I just watched. The MC continued, his voice stronger now, though every word sounded like a warning. Effective immediately, the private residence at 44 Windmere Coast Drive, previously offered as a temporary residence by Ms. Sarah Langford, is no longer under shared or implied occupancy. The legal title and full rights remain solely with Ms. Langford. Any attempt to occupy, modify, or transfer interest without express written consent will be subject to legal enforcement. I could see Matt from across the ballroom. His posture had stiffened. He had frozen mid-toast, glass half raised. Chloe stood beside him, her smile slowly draining away. She turned to him, mouthing something I couldn't hear. Gasps broke out from the tables. Guests leaned in, whispering frantically. Someone called out, "Is this part of the program?" But the MC wasn't done. Additionally, the estate has been removed from all registry submissions submitted under the name Matthew Donnelly, including proposed listings with Hale and Moore Realty. Any contractual claims pending under Mr. Donnelly's name shall be considered fraudulent and referred for investigation. The word fraudulent landed like a stone in a still pond. The entire room had shifted. What had once been warm and golden was now sharp-edged and breathless. Matt moved then, abruptly, trying to cross the room, but Maggie stepped forward, calm as ever, intercepting him with a firm hand raised. "Sit down," she said clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "This is not your stage." Chloe looked like someone had taken the floor out from under her. Her eyes searched the room, landing on me. For a moment, neither of us moved. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her face was pale, stunned. I stood slowly, not to draw attention, but simply to move toward the door. And yet, all attention followed me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken aloud by someone else in my stead. I passed Matt, who now stood frozen, his jaw clenched. I didn't look at him. I didn't stop. I passed Chloe, whose eyes pleaded without fully understanding. I gave her the smallest nod, of sadness, not of anger, and I kept walking. Outside, the air was cool and salty, the ocean beyond the cliffs restless with wind. I paused for a moment on the stone steps, listening to the muffled chaos behind the doors. Somewhere in that room, years of assumptions were unraveling, layers of falsehood peeling away. It wasn't revenge. It was simply the arrival of truth. I looked down at the folio in my hands, then toward the horizon. This moment hadn't come easily, but it had come clearly. And finally. Behind me, the music did not resume. I stood near the back of the room as Maggie handed Matt the folder. Her face was unreadable, but I knew her well enough to see the purpose behind her silence. She didn't speak a word, just extended the envelope with a steady hand and stepped back, as though she had just delivered a verdict and was now watching the sentence unfold. I could hear the rustle of paper as Matt opened it, flipping through the pages. At first, his eyes scanned with that same smirk of superiority he always wore when paperwork was involved, as if no document could ever tell him something he didn't already know. But then something shifted. His brow twitched. His eyes lingered longer on one page, then the next. His lips pressed into a line. The room had not yet caught on. People were still murmuring about the earlier announcement. The MC had tried to return to his script, awkwardly fumbling through congratulations and trying to pretend nothing had happened. But it was too late. There was a tension now, a crackle in the air. And when Matt suddenly stepped forward and whispered something to Chloe, that tension grew louder. She turned to him, confused. He held the folder out toward her, but she hesitated before taking it. Her smile faltered as she read, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. I watched her eyes dart across the pages, then back at Matt. Then slowly she turned her head toward me. There it was, that moment, that sliver of time where a daughter sees her mother not as the passive figure she thought she could ignore, but as someone who had been quietly moving pieces behind the curtain. Matt's voice cut through the low murmurs. "This is ridiculous," he said, trying to laugh, but the sound was hollow. "There must be a mistake here." Maggie didn't flinch. "There's no mistake." Chloe looked at her again, eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "The catering invoice," Maggie said evenly, "was routed through a holding company. That company is owned by a trust. That trust is administered by me and funded entirely by your mother." I could feel the collective inhale around the room. Glasses stopped mid-air. A fork clattered against a plate. Someone near the back whispered, "She paid for the wedding?" Chloe took a step forward. No, we paid for this. We did. Maggie raised a brow. You paid for 15%. The rest, venue, dress, flowers, band, transportation, even the valet service, was covered by my client, quietly, at her request. Matt laughed again, sharper this time. Why? Why would she do that and not say a word? I spoke then. Not loudly, not angrily, just enough to be heard. Because I wanted this day to be beautiful for my daughter, not for gratitude, not for credit, just because I loved her. Chloe turned fully to face me now. Her face was a mixture of confusion and something deeper, something I couldn't yet name. Why wouldn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? I asked. Would you have accepted it without suspicion, or would it have turned into another argument about control? Her lips parted, but no words came out. Matt snapped, You tried to make us look like fools. No, I said, still calm. You did that all on your own. He threw the folder onto a nearby table. This changes nothing. Maggie stepped closer, her voice ice. It changes quite a bit. Legally, the contracts for every vendor list the trust as guarantor, which means should any damage be caused today, or should your actions reflect poorly on the trust's reputation, there are clauses for immediate recourse. Recourse? Chloe asked. What does that mean? Maggie tilted her head. It means that someone who pays the bills gets a seat at the table. For the first time, Matt looked genuinely unsettled. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He glanced toward the guests, who were now openly watching the spectacle, no longer pretending to sip their drinks or mind their meals. The pianist had stopped playing. The air was thick with curiosity and unease. Someone near the door whispered, Is this about the villa? I took a slow breath and met Matt's eyes. That villa you wanted the keys to? The one you said I should hand over to keep the family unified? You didn't even think to ask who really owned it, or how it was paid for. He sneered. You're playing games. No, I said. I just stopped playing yours. Chloe looked between us, her mouth trembling. You funded the wedding. Why wouldn't you just tell me? Because, I said quietly, you stopped listening a long time ago. Silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, Chloe stepped back. Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast, swallowing hard. I wasn't here to hurt her. I wasn't here to embarrass anyone. But there comes a moment when truth no longer waits for a convenient time. It arrives uninvited, like a tide breaking against a carefully built sandcastle. Matt turned to Maggie. You had no right. I had every legal right, she interrupted coolly. I acted on behalf of the trust. You walked into this wedding thinking you were securing your future. What you failed to understand, she turned slightly, glancing at me, was that the foundation you built it on never belonged to you. Chloe lowered her head. I couldn't tell what she was thinking. Maybe even she didn't know. The guests were now murmuring openly. Some shook their heads. A few looked sympathetic. Others were just stunned. The atmosphere had shifted entirely, and still the folder sat there on the table, unopened by most, but already heavy with consequence. I looked at it one last time and then turned away. Let them read it. Let them see. Let them understand. I sat at the edge of the garden, my hands folded over my lap, watching the ripple Matt's face made across the wedding crowd. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Maggie hadn't spoken a word to him yet, but I knew what she carried in that satchel was heavier than any confrontation. She walked with quiet precision, my former stepdaughter, now my attorney, sharp as ever in her navy suit. She nodded once in my direction before veering toward Matt and Chloe, who had retreated to the corner of the patio under the pretense of taking photos. Matt's smile faltered when he saw her. Chloe leaned in to whisper, but Maggie was already there, cool and firm. She reached into her bag and handed Matt a manila folder. I believe these belong to you, she said. His hands trembled before he even touched the documents. What is this? Chloe asked, voice rising. "Proof," Maggie replied. "Bank transactions, loan applications, identity use without authorization." Matt's face drained of color. I stayed where I was, letting it unfold. He flipped through the papers, copies of documents he never thought I'd get my hands on. 8 months ago, I'd started noticing discrepancies. Mail opened and resealed. Notifications from accounts I never remembered creating. A small, persistent instinct told me something was off. So, I hired someone. Quietly, discreetly. The investigator was thorough, efficient, and precise. Within weeks, I had a timeline. Matt had used my name to create a line of credit. A $120,000 loan for renovation, deposited into an account under his shell, LLC. He forged my signature. When I confronted the paper trail, it was undeniable. I never confronted him directly. I wasn't ready. But I kept building my wall of evidence. Now, Maggie handed him the final nail. A printed record of the investigator's report, timestamps, surveillance screenshots, notaries confirming they never saw me in person, only a man matching Matt's build, wearing a mask and cap. "You're bluffing," Matt whispered, voice low. Maggie didn't flinch. "You'll want to read page 12. That's where the affidavit from the notary appears. And page 18, that's the surveillance from the bank lobby time-stamped. You're wearing Chloe's birthday gift, the watch with the green leather strap." I saw Chloe recoil. Matt's bravado cracked. "I did it for us," he hissed. I stood, slowly approaching. "No, Matt. You did it for yourself. You wanted the villa. You wanted the money. You thought if you isolated me enough, wore me down, I'd hand it all over." His jaw clenched. "You have no proof I did it knowingly." "You'll have a chance to say that when the hearing starts. The subpoena's in that folder, too." His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since I met him, he looked truly afraid. Chloe turned to me, eyes wide. "Mom?" I looked at her, not with anger, but something quieter, exhaustion. "I wanted to believe you chose love. I didn't think you'd choose fraud." She tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. Matt dropped the folder. It hit the grass with a dull thud, scattering a few pages across the patio tiles. I let the silence hang, not out of spite, but because there was nothing else left to say. And yet, the evening wasn't over. Not yet. The room had fallen into a silence so dense it pressed against my chest. Matt stood motionless near the edge of the garden, his face pale and lips parted, as if still trying to form a rebuttal that wouldn't come. Chloe, beside him, gripped the stem of her champagne glass so tightly I half expected it to snap. But there was still one truth left to unfold, one they hadn't anticipated, though they'd built their schemes atop my name, my money, and my silence. I gave a small nod to Maggie. She walked to the center of the reception space with calm authority and addressed the master of ceremonies. "There's one final message from the bridegroom's mother. Please play the file marked Estate Matters, time-stamped July 4th. He hesitated, but obeyed. A projector flickered to life against the white wedding tent, and within seconds, my face appeared on the screen. It was a recording we'd done in my study. No frills, no lawyers speaking for me. Just my voice, steady and clear. "To whom it may concern," I began, "this is Sarah Whitmore. As of this recording, I remain in full mental and legal capacity. The purpose of this message is to confirm the update of my estate and inheritance directives." I watched the guests shift in their chairs, eyes narrowing, expressions tightening. "I have chosen to remove Chloe Whitmore from all beneficiary designations, effective immediately." The air snapped. Some gasped. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. "She is no longer entitled to the primary villa, the trust accounts, nor the commercial property shares previously designated under her name." This decision was not taken lightly. It comes after careful observation of her repeated disregard for my well-being, her involvement in efforts to isolate and defraud me, and her complete betrayal of the trust I placed in her. Maggie stood stone-faced as the words rang out. Matt moved to step forward, but Maggie raised one finger. "You'll want to hear the rest." My video continued. Instead, I hereby designate Maggie Rivers as executor and primary beneficiary of my estate. Her loyalty, integrity, and service throughout the last decade, both as an attorney and as someone I came to trust as family, have led to this decision. The projector screen shifted to legal paperwork. Signatures, timestamps, notarized seals. Then it cut back to me. Furthermore, a substantial portion of the estate has been redirected to the Foundation for Independent Seniors, an initiative close to my heart, supporting single elderly individuals at risk of exploitation. I looked up, meeting the eyes of the guests watching the screen. Let this serve as my final say. I've loved deeply and lost painfully. I've trusted and been betrayed, but I refuse to die complicit in my own erasure, thank you. The screen went black. It was as if time had stilled. Chloe stood frozen, her face contorting between disbelief and rage. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I already did," I replied softly. "You're punishing me. For what? For marrying your son?" "For trying to erase me while spending my money," I answered, still calm. "You staged a wedding with my name missing from the invitation. You humiliated me in front of guests I paid for. You tried to take my home." Matt's hands curled into fists. "You never said anything. You smiled at us." "I was waiting," I said. "I needed you to show yourselves." A woman in the crowd stood up. It was Eleanor, a longtime friend and former colleague. "Good for you, Sarah," she said, loud enough to be heard. Another voice chimed in, then another. A ripple of quiet affirmations swept through the space. Not everyone, no, but enough to make Chloe's face crumble in disbelief. She turned toward Matt, who had nothing left to offer. Maggie walked to me, handed me the same pen I'd used to sign the new directives. "It's done," she said. And it was. The moment the last word of my will echoed into silence, Chloe let out a choked sound that didn't resemble any human emotion I recognized. It was a rasp of disbelief, a strangled breath caught between pride and collapse. Her knees wobbled, and she stepped forward, arms out as if pleading to a force she couldn't comprehend. No, you can't do this. I didn't mean it like that, Sarah. Please, Mom, She stuttered, the words clashing and tumbling from her lips like a desperate avalanche. I didn't move. Tears streaked down her perfect bridal makeup, turning blush into muddy streaks and mascara into ruin. She took another step toward me, bare heels clicking on the marble tiles that moments ago had hosted her entrance as a bride. Now they sounded like hollow knocks on a coffin. "Please," she whispered. "I was just angry. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It was supposed to be a joke." "A joke?" My voice was barely above a murmur. "You locked the gates to my own villa. You removed my name from the guest list. You handed out champagne and smiled as if my absence meant nothing. You slapped me at your rehearsal dinner in front of your family. Was that part of the joke, too?" She fell to her knees, gripping the hem of my dress like a child begging their mother not to leave. "I was scared. I thought you'd never truly accept me. And when you did, when you gave us everything, I panicked. I thought I had to secure it before you changed your mind." Matt didn't speak. He had slumped onto one of the chairs, hunched forward, hands over his mouth, his eyes staring into something only he could see. All the confident swagger from the engagement party, the smug silence at the gate, the dismissive glances during the ceremony, it had all drained from him. He looked like a man who had discovered too late that the floor beneath him was nothing but dust. "I didn't know what I was doing," Chloe cried. "It just kept going, and I didn't know how to stop. Please, Sarah, I'll return everything. We'll give it all back. Just don't erase me from your life." I lowered my eyes to meet hers. They were red, glassy, unrecognizable from the girl I once watched read on my porch swing, tucked beneath a quilt I'd stitched by hand. "I didn't leave you," I said. My voice didn't tremble. "You left me the day you asked for my villa, the day you looked me in the eye and asked for the keys to my life like I was a temporary guest." She shook her head violently. No, please, you misunderstood. It was just about securing the future. Matt said we had to act fast or the trust would be frozen and... Don't bring him into this, I cut in. Matt didn't speak that day. You did. Matt looked up finally. I should have stopped her, he said, his voice hollow. I saw what she was doing. I didn't stop it. You didn't just watch, Matt, I said, turning to him. You participated. You benefited. You silenced me at your engagement dinner. You watched me cry in the hallway and walked right past me. And then you forged my signature to open a line of credit. Chloe gasped. What? Matt blinked slowly, his expression collapsing even further. I thought it'd get paid off. I thought I could make it right later. Later never comes, I said, stepping back. That's the thing about betrayal. You don't notice it while you're doing it. You notice it when there's nothing left to take. Chloe tried to stand again, gripping my arms, shaking. Please, one more chance. We'll change. You can live with us. You can have anything back. I'll do anything you say. I gently pulled her hands from me. No, I gave you more chances than you deserved. The music that had once filled the garden was now silent. The guests were still, some murmuring, others watching with stunned fascination. Even the string lights above us seemed to flicker more slowly, as if mourning what had died between us. You wanted the crown without the history, I told Chloe, the comfort without the cost, but I'm not your stepping stone. She dropped her gaze, shoulders trembling, sobs growing louder. Matt whispered something I couldn't hear, then leaned forward and buried his face in his hands. I had never seen my son cry, not even when his father died. But now, as the weight of everything settled on his shoulders, he broke, not loudly, but with the quiet shame of someone who realized they were never the hero of their story. I looked at them, my son and the woman he chose, and for a fleeting moment, grief tugged at the edge of my heart, but it was grief I'd already buried. I had mourned their loss long before this moment. Maggie stepped forward, standing beside me. Her presence reminded me that I was not alone. I never had been. I had just been surrounded by the wrong people. It's time, I said softly. Chloe tried one last time, her voice hoarse. Sarah, please. I turned and walked away. As I stood there, the silence still ringing in the aftermath of Chloe's breakdown, I felt Maggie move closer. She hadn't said a word since the reading of the will. She'd simply stood beside me like a quiet wall of strength, her hands folded, her gaze steady. But now, I saw something shift in her eyes. Not calculation, not strategy. Something far more human. She stepped forward, just enough for her voice to carry across the stunned reception space, but not so far that she left my side. Then she turned, not to the crowd, but to me. I think it's time they knew, Maggie said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, almost hesitant. Not about the legal work, about you. I blinked, unsure what she meant, but she didn't wait for my permission. I was 17 when I met Sarah, she said, turning now to face the guests, her voice clearer with each word. At the time, I lived with my father and his new wife. She hated me. Not in the way girls say their stepmother doesn't like them. I mean truly hated me. She'd taken over the finances, changed locks, and convinced my father I was a burden. One day, I came home from school to find my clothes in garbage bags on the porch. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Maggie didn't flinch. She looked straight ahead. I didn't know where to go. I slept 2 nights behind the old chapel in town. On the 3rd day, a woman brought me hot soup. That woman was Sarah. My breath caught in my chest. It had been so many years. I never imagined she remembered the soup. She didn't ask me who I was. She didn't ask what I'd done. She only asked one thing. Are you safe? I wasn't, and she knew. She took me in, gave me a room in her guest house, and spoke to my school. She didn't treat me like a project. She treated me like a person. Tears pressed against the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had no dreams then. I thought maybe I'd get a part-time job, figure out how to survive. But Sarah saw more. She helped me apply for a scholarship. She edited every one of my essays, sat with me through every rejection letter, and reminded me that rejection wasn't the end. It was just noise. When I got the offer from Cornell, she was the first person I called. A murmur rolled through the crowd again. Cornell. And when I graduated, Maggie continued, her voice cracking just a little, Sarah was there, in the front row, clapping the loudest. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat was thick with emotion. That day at her graduation, I remembered feeling proud, but distant, unsure if I still belonged in her life. She was becoming someone powerful, someone who didn't need my porch or my soup anymore. Maggie turned fully to me now. You didn't just save me from homelessness. You gave me back my voice. You helped me remember who I was before the world convinced me I didn't matter. Everything I've built, my firm, my name, my reputation, stands on the shoulders of the woman who saw me when I had nothing. There wasn't a sound in the garden. Not even the wind dared to interrupt her. You all know me as a lawyer, she said to the crowd. But before I was anything, I was just a girl Sarah Hale refused to abandon. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she faced me again. You've spent so much of your life pouring into others who didn't deserve it. But you never once asked for repayment. You didn't just fight for the villa or your rights today. You reminded everyone here that dignity isn't negotiable, that love given freely matters more than anything bought or inherited. I was crying now, quietly. I didn't wipe the tears. I let them stay. Chloe sat frozen beside Matt, her red-rimmed eyes wide with realization. Whatever she thought she had on me, whatever grip she believed entitlement gave her, was gone. Maggie had peeled back the curtain and shown them all something they never cared to ask. Not a bitter mother, not a vengeful woman, just someone who had once chosen kindness and built an entire life around protecting it. I reached for Maggie's hand. Thank you, I said quietly, the words carrying more weight than I thought possible. She nodded. I owe you more than that, but I'll never stop repaying it. The garden was silent again, but it wasn't hollow. It was full of breath, of awakening, of the quiet sound of shame being replaced by truth. They thought the fallout would be private, that somehow the mess they made could be swept under the carpet like dust from a careless spill. But the world had already seen too much. Someone had recorded the moment Maggie handed the envelope to the MC. Another caught the stunned silence when the statement was read aloud. By nightfall, the video had gone viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. Mother of the bride drops legal bombshell during vows, one headline said. Billionaire heiress disowns daughter mid-wedding, another blared. None of them got the details quite right, but the damage was already done. By morning, Matt's family company was trending, for all the wrong reasons. I never knew how much of their wealth was built on borrowed time. But the cracks started showing fast. Investors pulled out. Clients terminated contracts. Articles resurfaced with questions about ethics, credibility, and undisclosed lawsuits from years ago. Chloe's PR agency tried to run damage control, but no one wanted to be associated with the woman caught crying, while her mother revealed years of manipulation. In less than a week, their empire unraveled. Chloe called twice. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, out of mercy. There was nothing left to say. The third time, she left a voicemail. Mom, I'm sorry. I messed up. I don't know what to do anymore. Everyone's turned on me. Can we talk? I listened, then deleted it. I wasn't cruel. I was finished. From neighbors to strangers, people started asking questions. I didn't answer any of them. I kept tending to my garden, kept walking to the bookstore on Thursdays, kept my coffee black and my silence firm. Let the world spin. I had done what I needed to. Maggie kept me updated in measured tones. Matt's father filed for bankruptcy, she said one evening, her eyes glancing at the documents. They're losing the second property. The accounts are frozen pending investigation. And Chloe? I asked, not because I wanted to know, but because part of me still cared. She's out of a job. Her firm let her go. Apparently they didn't appreciate her name trending next to words like entitled and fraud adjacent. Her LinkedIn is gone. I nodded, quietly. The press tried to reach me. A reporter even waited outside my gate one morning. Josephine calmly placed a copy of the cease and desist order in his hand without opening the gate. He left within 5 minutes. They didn't understand. This wasn't a story to monetize. It was the closing of a chapter that had rotted from the inside long before anyone bothered to read it. A week after the wedding, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting was Chloe's. Uneven, rushed. "Mom, I don't blame you. I want you to know that. I was blinded. By Matt, by the house, by what I thought I deserved. I see that now. I thought you were trying to hold power over us by not contributing more. I didn't realize you were already giving more than anyone else had. I'm so ashamed. Please forgive me. Please." There was a time when I would have cried reading that. But now, I just sat with the letter, let its weight rest in my lap like a pebble pretending to be a stone. She wasn't a child anymore. She made choices, and she had to live with them. The fallout spread beyond the family. Matt's younger brother lost his scholarship when the news broke. His college didn't want the association. Their mother had to step down from her board position. Invitations dried up. The same people who toasted them a week ago now avoided their calls. Funny how fast people run when the light turns on. But I didn't rejoice. That's the thing no one tells you about justice. It doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels like sweeping glass. Necessary, but painful. Josephine found me one afternoon on the back porch, my tea cooling untouched beside me. "You did the right thing," she said gently. "Did I?" She nodded. "You protected the truth. And yourself." I believed her. Or tried to. A few days later, Maggie called with news I didn't expect. "Chloe filed for separation," she said. "It's not official yet, but the paperwork is in." I didn't know whether to feel relief or regret, maybe both. She listed emotional coercion, Maggie added, and cited financial deceit. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to see the world clearly, or at least the damage she let fester. "Thank you, Maggie," I said, "for everything." She was quiet for a beat. "I think it's over now, legally at least. But the rest, that takes time." I knew that too well. That evening I sat by the sea, watching the waves move like breath, gentle, rhythmic, unapologetic. The sky was bruised with sunset, a palette of lavender and burnt orange. For the first time in weeks, I let my shoulders fall. Let the ache roll off. Let silence be something other than burden. Matt and Chloe had taken so much from me. But they had also given me something back. The clarity to walk away. The courage to reclaim peace. The proof that kindness without boundaries is just slow self-erasure. The world would move on. The headlines would fade. But the lesson? That would stay. And I would carry it. Not like a scar, but like armor. They told me I didn't have to say yes. That I could keep my story quiet, let the dust settle, and return to my quiet life by the sea. But something inside me, something long buried, said it was time to speak. So when the producers of Evening Reflections reached out, I asked one question. "Will you let me speak the truth, uninterrupted?" They said yes. I said yes too. The studio was soft lit, with walls the color of calm. The host, Miranda Lane, was warm in that disarming way that made you feel like you were sitting across from an old friend. She didn't rush me. She didn't pry. She began with a gentle invitation. "Sarah, thank you for being here. Why now?" I looked out into the studio, into the quiet. Then I looked at her and answered plainly. Because silence, for me, became a kind of betrayal, not just of myself, but of others who are still quiet, still enduring. I hadn't rehearsed that line. It simply rose up. We spoke for almost an hour. About Chloe, about Matt. But more than that, we spoke about years before them. Years when I learned to smile through gritted teeth. When I convinced myself that peace was avoiding conflict. even at the cost of my own breath. I shared how I had once given everything I had, my energy, my finances, my emotional bandwidth, until there was almost nothing left for me. "When did you know something had to change?" Miranda asked. I told her it was the day I found myself apologizing to a young couple for not handing over my house. Apologizing. That word rang through the studio. Some in the audience shifted in their seats. Others held still, the way people do when they recognize themselves in someone else's story. I thought I was being generous, I continued. But really, I was being erased, slowly, elegantly, until I didn't recognize my own reflection. Miranda didn't interrupt. She let the silence sit like a companion, and then she asked, "What would you say to women who feel like they owe their families everything?" I paused. You don't owe anyone your peace, and love that demands your disappearance isn't love, it's leverage. When the show aired, I didn't expect much. Maybe a few kind messages, maybe a neighbor dropping off flowers, but within hours, my inbox was full. Thousands of women, some in their 30s, others well into their 70s, wrote to say, "That's my story too." One woman wrote, "I'm 62. My son has been living in my home for a decade without paying rent, and I've been afraid to say no. Thank you for showing me I'm allowed to draw a line." Another said, "Your calm is what struck me. Not rage, just calm conviction. That's the kind of strength I want to grow into." Even men wrote, sons, husbands. "I didn't realize what my mother endured," one message read. "I'm flying out to visit her next week. I need to say thank you, and I'm sorry." The flood of stories was overwhelming, not because of the pain, but because of the clarity. These were not weak people. They were women and men who had given so much for so long, they forgot they were allowed to stop. Miranda's team asked me to come back for a second segment, this time to speak with other guests who had been through similar experiences. I agreed. We sat in a circle, a retired teacher from New Mexico, a former nurse from Vermont, a grandmother from Detroit. Each one had faced some version of what I had. Family members who took and took, disguising their entitlement as need. One woman said her daughter cut her off completely after she refused to co-sign a mortgage. Another said her son hadn't spoken to her since she declined to pay for his second wedding. We weren't there to vent. We were there to witness one another, to say, "I see you. You're not alone. You're not wrong for wanting peace." A movement began quietly after that. Not a protest, not a campaign, just a shared whisper that kept growing louder. Women posting clips with the hashtag #ReclaimingQuiet, letters to editors, community groups forming around the idea that self-worth doesn't expire with age, that saying no can be the most loving thing you do, for yourself and for others. One day, a letter arrived from a school in Minnesota. A high school counselor had played the interview in a class on ethics and identity. The students were asked to write reflections. She enclosed 10 of them. One 16-year-old wrote, "I think we forget our parents are people. I'm going to ask my mom about her dreams this weekend." I cried. For that one. For all the ones who might begin to see their mothers, grandmothers, aunts as whole people, not just roles. Not long after, a publisher reached out. They asked if I'd consider writing a memoir. I said I'd think about it. But whether or not that book ever comes to life, I've already written what mattered. In those interviews, in those quiet moments when I spoke without shaking, in the thousands of women who now look in the mirror and whisper, "I am still here." People ask if I regret what happened, if I'd take it back, knowing the pain it caused. My answer is simple. I regret letting it go on so long. I regret not speaking sooner. But I don't regret the silence I broke, or the light that followed. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. Sometimes it's just one sentence said clearly, in a room where someone's finally listening. And sometimes that's enough to start again. Some mornings I still wake at 6 out of habit. Not because I have anywhere to be, but because the light that spills into the villa at that hour is gentle, like a breath that hasn't yet spoken. I rise, brew tea, and sit by the window that overlooks the olive trees. They've stood here longer than I have, some older than my memory, some younger than my regrets. The house is quiet, not heavy quiet like it used to be, but alive quiet. You can hear the hum of the sea from the north, the creak of floorboards expanding in the warmth, the soft purr of Josephine's slippers as she makes her way down the hall. She doesn't ask if I want breakfast anymore. She just brings it. A soft-boiled egg, sourdough, and something sweet if she knows I've slept badly. I always have the same answer anyway. Thank you. After everything, Josephine never left. When others disappeared, some with shame, others with silence, she stayed. On the evening after the wedding unraveled, she brought me a wool blanket and sat with me in the garden. Not as an employee, not as someone filling space. Just a woman beside another woman who'd survived something brutal without raising her voice. There are days when no one visits. I no longer dread them. Solitude has stopped feeling like punishment. It feels like air returning to lungs long denied. I walk the grounds. I journal. I prune the lemon trees even though I have no idea what I'm doing. Sometimes I laugh when they grow sideways anyway, like they've made peace with being imperfect, just like I have. The villa no longer echoes with the tension of unsaid things. Matt and Chloe's laughter used to bounce off these walls, and for a time, I thought it meant love. Now, I understand it was performance, noise that covered intention. They haven't called since that day. I don't expect them to. I don't expect anything from anyone anymore. And in that, oddly, lies the freedom. Maggie visits every other Sunday. She brings case files and tarts, updates me on the legal clinic she's funding now. She reads me passages from her favorite books, even though I've read them before. We sit without needing to fill every silence. I look at her and see 1,000 things at once. The girl she was, the lawyer she's become, and the future she's still building. All because someone once believed she was worth more than her past. Sometimes, when the light hits just right, I take out the old box, filled with yellowed photos, notes in my husband's handwriting, scraps of articles from when we launched the tech firm. I don't cry over them anymore. I nod, remembering. That was one version of me, and now I get to live another. There's no agenda now. No pressure to smile for guests, to host dinners I didn't enjoy, to be the soft landing for people who only came around to ask for something. I used to think boundaries meant loneliness, but I've never been more held in clarity, in simplicity, in the quiet company of my own truth. The neighbors wave when they pass. The mailman always asks if Josephine's coffee is as strong as last week. The town knows. They've seen the headlines, the interview, the stories swirling around a wedding that turned into something else entirely. But here, in this small pocket of the world, they just let me be. And that's all I ever wanted. In the evenings, Josephine and I sometimes play cards. She always wins. I suspect she lets me win just enough to keep my pride intact. Once, she looked up from her hand and said, "You breathe different now." I smiled, because I finally exhaled. The house isn't silent anymore. It's still. There's a difference. Last week, I started a new routine, something just for me. Every Friday, I light a single candle in the library and write one letter, not to send, just to express. To people I've loved, to ones I've lost, even to the younger versions of myself who needed comfort and didn't get it. I seal them in envelopes, date them, and place them in a cedar box labeled simply, "Forgiven." I don't believe in revenge. I believe in return. Returning to yourself, returning to the truth, returning what was taken, not by force, but by grace. And in that return, finding a peace so loud it hums through your bones. They thought taking the villa would be the victory. But this house was never the prize. The peace that fills it now, that's the real inheritance. Not money, not land, but the right to exist as I am, without apology, without permission. And that, I've learned, is enough. The idea came to me one morning as I was sipping tea beneath the old jacaranda tree, the one that blooms just once a year in a sudden riot of violet. I was flipping through a letter Maggie had received from a client, an older woman whose son had convinced her to sign over her only property, promising he'd take care of everything. He disappeared 2 weeks later. No calls, no apology, just silence and a foreclosure notice. I folded the letter and stared into the distance, the weight of it pressing into my chest. It wasn't the first letter like this Maggie had received, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. "We should do something," I said aloud, not to anyone in particular. But Josephine looked up from the garden as if she already knew what I meant. And Maggie, later that evening, didn't hesitate. "Let's build it," she said. "Let's make it real." That was how Serenity Lives was born. We began with 2 desks pushed together in the villa's library and a handwritten list of women we personally knew, neighbors, old friends, women from church, who'd once whispered stories they never had the courage to finish telling. Stories of stolen pensions, verbal degradation, sons who moved in and slowly turned every room into a prison. There were too many stories, too many women who thought they had nowhere to go. Within weeks, Maggie drew up the paperwork. I funded the foundation quietly, transferring assets I had long set aside for family legacy. This was legacy, helping those who were told to stay silent, who were told that age meant invisibility, who were told that suffering was simply part of the contract of love. We weren't going to let that stand anymore. Serenity Lives began modestly, offering free legal counsel, a 24/7 hotline, emergency housing referrals, and financial literacy workshops for women over 55. But word spread. The need was greater than we imagined. Retired teachers, widowed grandmothers, even former business owners who had once lived in homes bigger than mine now sat across from our volunteers, eyes filled with shame they didn't deserve to carry. The foundation didn't just offer help, it offered language. Language to name what had happened, language to push back, language to rebuild. "It wasn't your fault," became our first sentence. "You still have time," became our anthem. We created small groups where women could meet weekly, just to talk. No judgment, no solutions required, just truth and tea and the slow, gentle work of healing. Josephine, despite claiming she had retired, now ran the Sunday sessions. She baked lemon scones and made everyone feel seen. We hired 2 more staff members, both women who had once walked through our doors for help. One of them, Louise, had been a nurse for 30 years until her daughter-in-law slowly pushed her out of her own home. She now heads our housing advocacy team. She says every key we help return feels like reclaiming a breath she once lost. Local news picked up the story after our first annual gala. I didn't want to attend at first. I never liked the spotlight, especially after everything. But Maggie insisted. "It's not about you. It's about showing them it can be done." I stood on that stage, looking out at a sea of women who, like me, had survived things no one had put words to. I told them, "The day I stopped begging to be loved was the day I started living. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are not too late." The applause didn't matter. The emails we received afterward did. Dozens of women saying, "Thank you for saying it out loud." Some saying, "Can I come next time?" Others simply writing, "Me too." Every wall in the Serenity Lives office holds a framed story, a real woman, a real outcome. We don't hide the pain, but we don't glorify it either. We honor the truth and the courage it takes to speak it. And each morning, before I begin reading new cases, I walk past the wall that holds the Foundation's mission, to restore dignity, safety, and independence to women silenced in their own homes. I run my fingers across the final line, "Serenity lives in you." And I believe it. With everything I have left, I believe it. The knock on the door came just as the late afternoon light spilled golden across the marble floor. Josephine had just left to run errands, and I was alone in the villa, savoring the stillness. I wasn't expecting anyone. The serenity of retirement had given me the gift of solitude, and I rarely had unannounced guests. I opened the door slowly. There she stood, Chloe. She looked different, thinner, tired. Her eyes held something that hadn't been there before, not the sharp glint of entitlement, but something duller, grief maybe, or the slow erosion of illusions. But it wasn't just her. Standing beside her, clutching the hem of her long cardigan, was a little girl, a child, no older than 6, maybe 7. I froze. She had Matt's curls. My eyes dropped to her tiny fingers, gripping a worn stuffed rabbit with lopsided ears. Her eyes were round and cautious, the color of a summer pond. But there was something else, something familiar. They were mine. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. I stepped aside. "Come in." She walked in slowly, like someone walking into a place they once belonged but no longer knew how to navigate. The little girl trailed behind her silently, glancing around at the paintings, the vases, the light filtering through the stained glass. They sat in the sunroom. I poured tea. My hands trembled a little, not from fear or anger, but something heavier, a weight I didn't yet have a name for. "This is Lily," Chloe finally said, her voice low. The little girl glanced up at me, then quickly looked back down at her rabbit. "She's yours," Chloe added. "I mean, she's Matt's, and yours. I never told you. I never told anyone." The room fell utterly quiet. I stared at the child, now rocking slightly in her seat, humming under her breath. My breath caught in my throat. Years of silence unraveled inside me like torn fabric. "You never told him either?" I asked. Chloe shook her head. "He knew, but he didn't want her. He said she would complicate things, that she'd be a distraction, especially with the wedding and the plans. He asked me not to bring her around, said it would ruin the image." I closed my eyes. This child, this small, breathing, curious being, had been hidden from me like a secret I never asked to be kept. I thought I had already lost everything I could lose when Chloe betrayed me, but this felt deeper. "I didn't come here to ask for money," Chloe continued. "I know how that sounds, but it's not that. I left him. I left everything. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't let her grow up thinking that kind of man was someone to look up to." My heart thudded against my ribs. "She kept asking why she didn't have a grandma," Chloe whispered. "At school. When other kids made cards for theirs on Grandparents' Day. She made one anyway, said it was for the grandma she hadn't met yet." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small folded card, crayon-drawn flowers on the front, and inside, a scrawled message in wobbly letters. "Dear Grandma, I hope you're kind. Love, Lily." I held the card in my hands, and something broke in me. I had missed 6 birthdays, first steps, first words. A child who bore my blood had been growing up without my love. "I don't expect forgiveness," Chloe said, "but I thought you had the right to know." We sat in silence for a long time. Lily had wandered toward the piano and was pressing a few soft keys, the notes echoing gently through the room. "I used to play with Matt," I said absently. "I know," Chloe replied. "She found the videos. She watches them sometimes. That's how she recognized you when I showed her a photo." My eyes welled with tears I didn't try to stop. Lily came over and stood beside me. I looked down at her. She didn't speak, just reached out and touched the corner of my sweater. "Would you like to see the garden?" I asked softly. She nodded. I led her outside, Chloe trailing behind. Lily ran ahead down the gravel path, her giggle spilling out as butterflies rose from the bushes. She twirled beneath the jacaranda tree, the same one I had sat under when Serenity Lives was born. Chloe stood beside me, arms crossed. "I don't know if you can ever trust me again," she said. "I don't," I said evenly. "But this isn't about you. It's about her." She nodded, and for once, she didn't argue. As Lily plucked a fallen blossom and brought it to me with both hands, I knelt to accept it. She smiled. In that moment, I realized healing doesn't always begin with forgiveness. Sometimes it begins with a small hand in yours and the knowledge that despite everything, something innocent had survived, something I hadn't even known I was waiting for. That night, after Chloe and Lily left, I sat alone in the study, the house silent but not empty. My hands rested on the envelope Chloe had left on the table, a medical record, Lily's birth certificate, school photos. Proof. Not that I needed it. One look at the child had carved the truth into my bones. I didn't sleep much. Memories tumbled through me like loose pages in a storm. Matt as a baby, the way he used to grip my finger in his sleep. Chloe's first Thanksgiving at our table, so charming, so precise. All the years I tried to believe that love could patch what silence had broken. And now, this child. A new beginning, wrapped in the legacy of the past. The next morning, I walked into the conservatory where Maggie was reviewing contracts for the foundation. She looked up at me, eyes sharp as always, but her face softened when she saw my expression. "She came?" Maggie asked. I nodded. "With Lily." Her pen paused in midair. "How old?" 6. She closed the folder. What do you want to do?" I sat across from her. "I want to draw a line, not just for Chloe, for me, for Lily." Maggie waited, letting me find the words. "She's my granddaughter. She's innocent in all this, but I can't pretend nothing happened. I won't open the door wide just because I saw dimples and curls. Chloe doesn't get a clean slate. But Lily deserves one." Maggie nodded slowly. "You're thinking of a trust?" "Yes," I said. "One she can't access until she's 18, managed independently, with strict conditions." "Such as?" I looked out toward the garden where the jacaranda tree stood quiet in the breeze. "She has to be raised in truth. No lies about who she is or who I am. No vilifying, no erasing." Maggie was already scribbling notes. "And Chloe?" "She has no access, not a cent. The fund is for Lily's education, health care, safety, nothing more. I'll oversee it through a third party." We worked in silence for the next hour, laying the bones of something fragile, but real. By the time the sun moved toward the western windows, we had a draft ready. I called Chloe that afternoon. She sounded surprised, breathless. "Hello?" "I'm not calling to make peace," I began, "but I am calling for Lily." There was a long pause. "I'm setting up a trust," I continued. "It's irrevocable. She'll have what she needs, but with rules, non-negotiable." "Anything," Chloe said quickly. "What are they?" "She must be raised with honesty. She must know who her family is, where she comes from, without manipulation. I will not be painted as the villain or the stranger. She needs stability, not stories." "I understand," Chloe said, voice trembling. "There will be check-ins," I added. "Independent child welfare assessments. If anything feels murky," the trust pauses. Another pause. "I wasn't a good daughter-in-law," she whispered. "I know that. But I swear I've never lied to Lily about who her father is. I just didn't know how to tell her about the rest." "You'll figure it out," I said. "And I'll help when it's about her. But you and we're not rebuilding anything. Not now." "I didn't expect us to." "But one more lie," I said quietly, "and I'll walk away again." She didn't reply. I ended the call and let the quiet settle around me. A week later, Lily returned, this time without Chloe. Maggie had arranged for a supervised afternoon with a family therapist present, just to ensure boundaries. The therapist sat in the background, notebook in hand, while Lily and I planted daffodil bulbs in the garden. She asked questions about the trees, about the koi pond, about the painting in the hall of a woman in a red coat. I answered simply, honestly. I didn't push. I didn't dig. At one point, she looked up at me and asked, "Are you the grandma from the card I made?" I smiled. "Yes, I am." She nodded, as if filing that answer away, then turned back to her shovel. At the end of the visit, as the sun dipped low, I handed her a small book of pressed flowers and said, "You can come again, whenever you want." Her smile lit up her whole face. As they drove away, I stood by the gate. Maggie joined me, hands in her coat pockets. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "I'm doing the hard thing," I replied. "But it feels right." She glanced toward the setting sun. "You're drawing new lines." "No," I said. "I'm redrawing the old ones, the ones they thought they could erase." That night, I added one final note to the trust paperwork. This fund exists to honor the truth, protect innocence, and remind us that healing is not erasure. It is remembrance with boundaries. And that was enough. The villa was quiet again. No loud heels clicking across the marble, no echoes of slammed doors or raised voices. The rooms breathed a stillness I hadn't known in years, as if the walls themselves were grateful for peace. I walked slowly through the sunlit hallways, my fingers brushing the carved wooden railings, the velvet drapes now pulled wide open. Light poured in where shadows used to settle. Josephine had been busy transforming the guest wing. It no longer resembled a space of indulgence or vanity. Instead, soft linens, warm lamps, and baskets of fresh toiletries now greeted anyone who stepped inside. There were books by every bedside, fresh flowers in repurposed teacups. Every detail whispered, "You are welcome." We called it the Garden Wing, a quiet name for a quiet promise. It had taken months to design the program. Maggie and I worked with social workers, mental health counselors, and a small team of retired teachers and volunteers. The goal was simple: to offer a place for women like me, older, discarded, misunderstood, to rest, regroup, and begin again. No long-term requirements. No explanations needed, just a room, a door that locked from the inside, and someone nearby who cared. The first woman to arrive was named Dolores. 71, she had been evicted from her son's house after his new wife complained she was too opinionated. She came with one small suitcase and a crocheted shawl folded tightly around her shoulders. When I welcomed her at the gate, she didn't say much. But when I handed her the key and told her, "You don't owe us anything," her chin trembled. She clutched my hand for longer than expected. Each week, more came. A retired nurse whose grandchildren had blocked her number. A quiet widow pushed out after her late husband's estate was mismanaged by his nephews. A piano teacher whose daughter refused to let her attend her own granddaughter's recital. Their stories were different, but the ache in their eyes was the same. Not just loss, but invisibility. We gave them visibility back. Meals were served in the garden when the weather was kind. We had Sunday circles where anyone could speak or say nothing at all. There was no forced sharing, just gentle companionship. I often joined them, not as the owner, but as another woman who had once been told she was no longer useful. It surprised them at first how much I listened and how little I spoke about what had happened to me. But I didn't need to explain. They understood without words. Some stayed a week, some stayed a season. A few chose never to leave, and we made room for that too. One afternoon, as I stood under the olive tree near the back patio, watching Josephine carry lemonade to a pair of new arrivals, I realized something. I had once feared this house would become my prison. Now it had become something entirely different. Not a fortress, not a shrine, but a sanctuary. I repurposed the master suite into a shared library and craft room. The walk-in closet now held art supplies. My old bedroom became an office for caseworkers and volunteers. I moved into a smaller room overlooking the sea, just enough space for a desk, a chair, and a bed. It felt right. We hung no plaques, no signs on the gate. This wasn't a charity. It was a home. Sometimes late at night, I would hear laughter echo down the hallways, soft music drifting through an open door, and I would close my eyes and smile, knowing that the silence I once feared was no longer emptiness. It was peace. The villa hadn't been reclaimed in a legal sense. I had always owned it. But reclaiming it emotionally, spiritually, that took longer. It took grief. It took betrayal. It took walking through fire and still choosing softness. And now, each time I saw a woman walk through that front door with hesitation in her step but hope in her heart, I knew the villa had finally become what it was always meant to be, a place where no woman is asked to shrink herself just to be allowed to stay. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between the latest foundation donation summaries and a basket of hand-embroidered bookmarks sent by one of the residents. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, elegant, steady, but something about the pale blue envelope felt deeply personal. I brought it to the kitchen, made myself a cup of Earl Grey, and sat by the window overlooking the olive tree, sunlight pouring over the terracotta tiles like honey. I opened it slowly. "Dear Sarah," it began, "I've spent days trying to find the right words. I rewrote this 3 times and even consulted a poetry book at one point, but nothing seemed to match the simplicity of what I really want to say. Thank you. Thank you for saving me. Twice. First, when I was a girl, hiding bruises beneath long sleeves and silence. You saw me, even when I didn't know I needed to be seen. You didn't ask questions. You didn't demand explanations. You simply gave me a number to call, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and a place to stay where I could sleep through the night without flinching. That quiet act of kindness changed everything." I paused. The memory was still vivid. Maggie, no older than 12, had wandered into the school lounge after hours, eyes hollow, knuckles red. Her mother had passed years before, and her father's new wife had rules that changed by the hour. That day, I hadn't done much, just what I could. But apparently, it had been enough. The letter continued. "The second time you saved me, you didn't even know you were doing it. You gave me a story to believe in when mine was buried in shame. Watching you reclaim your name, your voice, your place in the world, not with vengeance but with grace and precision, has been the greatest education of my life. I've won legal awards, I've stood in courtrooms with thunder in my chest, but nothing compares to the dignity you held while standing in silence as others tried to erase you. You've taught me that strength is not the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's the one who chooses to speak last, when all eyes have turned away, and still speaks truth. You are not just my mentor. You are not just the woman who once offered me a spare key and an escape plan. You are not just the person who believed in my scholarship application when everyone else thought I wasn't ready. You are the definition of boundaries set with compassion, of wisdom earned, not inherited, of kindness that doesn't coddle but liberates. You are, in every sense, my mother. Not the kind I was born with, but the kind I was lucky enough to find." My hands trembled as I read that line again. I hadn't cried in a while, not the kind of tears that come from quiet joy. But there they were, soft, unexpected. She went on. "I remember once you told me that love isn't proven by how tightly we hold on, but by what we're willing to release. You've released a lot, Sarah. Grief, betrayal, the illusion of control. And what you've created in that space, this foundation, this home, this community, is nothing short of sacred. You once feared you'd die alone, but look around now. Every life you've touched ripples outward like circles in still water. You may not wear the title, but to so many women, you are a matriarch of hope. I hope you frame this letter, not for vanity, but so that on the quiet mornings when the wind is soft and no one needs you urgently, you can remember what you've built from brokenness and how deeply, unshakably, you are loved. With all my heart, Maggie." I sat there for a long while after finishing the last word, the paper still warm from my hands. Outside, the olive branches swayed in rhythm with the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, one of the women laughed. A short burst, followed by silence, and then laughter again. I folded the letter and placed it inside my journal. Later, I would reread it and maybe cry again. But for now, I simply poured another cup of tea and looked out the window. I didn't need to say anything, because I already had everything I needed. It took me nearly a year to begin writing. Not because I didn't have the words. God knows the words came like waves some nights, sudden and uninvited. But because I wasn't ready to sit with them, to arrange them in the quiet, to breathe through the parts that still ached. The villa had settled into a rhythm by then. Morning sunlight spilled across the floor tiles the way it used to when I first moved in, long before it became a battleground. Josephine kept the garden alive with herbs and lavender. Maggie stopped by every Sunday with books and updates from the Serenity Lives Foundation. I hosted tea circles for women who were still relearning how to sit in silence without fear. We didn't speak about the past unless someone needed to. Sometimes, just being was enough. But eventually, I knew the pages were waiting. So I sat at the old oak desk, the one I once used to sign checks and contracts, and began writing something entirely different. Not a legal brief, not a letter of eviction, just memory, truth, uncluttered. I started with the garden, the scent of lemon balm in June. Then the day Chloe came into the world, how tiny she was, how I had cried when I held her, how I had loved her fiercely, even through the distance that grew like ivy between us later. I wrote about the red scarf my husband left behind, still hanging on the back of the door, and how grief changes shape over time, but never really disappears. It just folds itself into the corners of your life. I wrote about betrayal, but not in anger, more like documenting a fire after the smoke clears. What burned? What survived? What glowed stubbornly beneath the ashes, refusing to die? I wrote about resilience, not the kind that roars, but the kind that hums beneath the skin, the type that keeps you from signing something you shouldn't, even when your hand trembles. Most of all, I wrote about boundaries, not walls, just lines, quiet, sacred lines that say, I am still here, I still have worth, and I don't owe anyone my ruin to prove it. Each chapter poured from me like rain on a roof that finally found its leak. There was no performance in it, no revenge, just truth, plain and whole. It felt like holding a lantern up to the darker corners of the past and saying, I see you. You don't own me anymore. Some evenings, I would stop mid-sentence, let my hand rest on the paper, and listen to the wind through the fig trees. I'd remember the silence that used to fill this house after Matt and Chloe left, and how different it felt now. Spacious, not empty. Holy even. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had reclaimed the space where it once lived. Maggie proofread each chapter gently. She never questioned my pauses or pressed for more. She just left notes in the margins like, "You're brave here," or "This part will help someone." That was all I needed. On the last page, I paused longer than I meant to. The sun was beginning to set, and everything in the villa was cast in a golden hush. Josephine had left early. The house was still. I held the pen, and I thought of all the women I had met, the ones who whispered, "I stayed too long," and the ones who said, "I never felt seen." I thought of the version of myself who had once believed she had to earn love by shrinking. I thought of the laughter that returned to my chest like a welcome guest, and then I wrote the final line. Sometimes the only way to keep a home sacred is to walk away from those who try to steal it. I signed my name at the bottom, Sarah Whitmore. Then I closed the journal, lit a single candle, and whispered a prayer I didn't even know I had memorized. Thank you for the silence. Thank you for the storm. And thank you for the peace that followed, loud in its quiet.